As you know, I've been asked to, I've been pleasantly surprised and enjoying the fact that I've been asked to answer some of your questions throughout the season of Lent, and we've had some wonderful questions. And the one that is probably one of the most hard, because there really isn't an answer to, is the one that I would like to address this morning, and that is, why are so many people falling away from their faith? And it's a reality, it's true. It's just that there isn't really any clear one reason why that's happening. So I did a lot of research, and I'd like to begin by quoting some people. There's an article that was titled "The Rise of Religious Nuns," N-O-N-E-S, indicates the end of religion as we know it. Now there's a title. With the rise of the nuns, now I'll define what nun is. Those who are defined as nuns are the ones who, when they take a survey and they are asked your religious preference, they'll put down none. Okay? So nuns are not the Catholic nuns. These are the nuns who state in whatever survey or whatever way they have that they have no official religious affiliation. Those are the nuns. The rise of the religious nuns indicate the end of religion as we know it. The author of this article says this, and I'll quote, "Look at what religion is doing in the world. It separates way more than unites. In my opinion, religion is a crutch for the weak, as are drugs. I don't need God, the same way I don't need to smoke crack. I have a strong head on my shoulders that knows right from wrong. I don't need a book written thousands of years ago to tell me otherwise." I wish I could say that that's the sentiment of just one person. I could spend probably a good hour just picking away at what he says. And granted, it's only one person, but the sentiment that he puts forward is something that is very widespread. It is a whole generation. Those who are millennials, those who are Gen Xers, this is their reality. They are the nuns. They are the ones who are turning away from faith. We are losing a generation of people. People who may have started in a church, may have been brought up through a Sunday school, but who now are saying they no longer are connected in any way, nor do they wish to. And in fact, in that particular article, most of it says the reason for that are those of us sitting in this church right now, including me. They point the finger at baby boomers. Now, there's an article that was written by a Frederick W. Schmidt. He titled that, "4 Choices Boomers Make That Are Killing Mainline Protestantism." There's another interesting title. In his article, he argues that it is the baby boomers who are responsible, those who were raised up in the 60s and the 70s that rebelled against everything, if you remember those days, as I do. If you don't, you probably were a part of those days, because that also was a big deal back then, huh? Those of us who are now gray hairs and who sit in the pews, he says, are among the reasons for this. And he gives 4 reasons. The first one, he said that most Americans walk away from their faith by the time they reach the age of 18. Most Americans will walk away from their faith by the time they reach the age of 18. Those unaffiliated by 18 account for 62% of the nuns. 62%. God bless you. But he went on, and he says by the time people get to the age of 30, you can add another 28% to them. For a total of 90% of Americans, by the time they reach the age of 30, are unaffiliated with a church, with a tradition, with a faith. 90%! I mean, that is shocking. That's why I think it's so important that we have a vital youth and family ministry. Because if we don't reach the Maddies when they're young, by the time they graduate from high school, they will be gone. Number 2, he says, they are leaving the faith because, 1, they have stopped believing in the religious teachings that they were brought up with. They just no longer believe what we are offering. The teachings of the church, whatever, and they aren't talking Christian church here, they're talking any denomination, any church, that by this time they pretty much are just saying, it's not for us anymore. We no longer believe it. And number 2, their family never were religious when they were growing up. That's the baby boomer problem. Number 1 is they just have themselves decided they no longer want to believe it. But the other thing is they aren't getting any kind of support at home. Their parents have very little faith that is demonstrated as well. There's very little religion in their families when they were growing up. Third reason, he says, for this, 72% of the religious nuns say they give little or no regard to God at all. In fact, the vast majority of them say that religion does more harm than good. 72% say religion is doing more harm than good, and they don't want to be a part of it. And fourthly, he says, again, us baby boomers have been lazy in rising our children up in the faith. Whether at church or at home, we are neglecting our responsibility as parents and as religious leaders. Since they don't see it in us, there is no anchor for them. Since they aren't seeing it at home, since they aren't seeing it when we're out in the public, it's the old thing, we go to church on Sunday, and by the time we hit the driveway, we're back to our old patterns again. If they don't see it in us, if they don't hear it in us, if they don't see it at home, if it's not reflected in any way, well, if it's not good enough for my folks, why should it be good for me? There's more. There's a man by the name of Gary Lauderman who also wrote about these religious nuns, saying that the rise of the nuns surely suggests it is the end of religion as we know it. I love these titles. I mean, they sure grab you, don't they? Because of the religious nuns, it suggests to this man that religion as we know it, it's gone. He writes, and again I quote, "Forget churches, forget priests or pastors, that hurts. Forget organized religion generally. What is sacred are no longer conventional objects like the cross, a singular religious identity like being a Methodist, or I would put in there a Lutheran, nor activities like going to church or prayer. Instead," he says, "the religious worlds in the contemporary and future United States, the religious world, the religious climate, the religious outline that we are presently seeing, contemporarily seeing, as well as into the future here in the United States, are robust and capacious, meaning widespread, providing an abundance of spiritual possibilities." Well, that sounds good. He's saying it may not be in the church, But there's still a wonderful array of religious opportunities that are out there, found in unexpected places, like drum circles, like meditation exercises. Think yoga devotion. Like sports events. How many people are really, really committed to going to their children and their grandkids' sports events? And other expressions from popular culture, like things like music and videos and so forth. In other words, what he is saying is the religious experience that we grew up with, the feeling of connections that we grew up with, the feelings of belonging that you and I grew up with within the bounds of a church, are now by people being experienced in ways that you and I are not comfortable or have probably never been involved in. Everything from, like he says, drum circles and like yoga devotion, all the way to sporting events. And those things are becoming the new religion, the new religious experience. Because our children do not and have not seen faith in many of us our age. There is no anchor for them. By letting our children choose for themselves what they want to believe, we'll raise them up in the church, we'll get them through Sunday school, get them through confirmation, and after that, they can choose for themselves. That was a popular idea back in the 70s and 80s, and it has gone all the way up through us today. We are the ones who promoted that, and it was promoted to us, those of us who were growing up at that time, is that we'll just let our kids decide for themselves what they want to believe. Well, the reality has come is that when you give your kids that option and don't give them a pattern to follow, they will choose nothing. If you don't set the example, if you don't teach them what to do, how to do it, whether it is in life or whether it's in faith, if you don't give them the grounding and they don't see it in who we are as people, then they will see that we are not genuine. And if we're not genuine in this, no matter what we say or no matter what we think is right, it means nothing to them and they will choose nothing. And we have been seeing that all along. All I have to do is ask a simple question, and that is, what happens to families? I'm not saying kids. What happens to families once the last child is done with confirmation? We know tradition says that once the kids get confirmed, there's a real good chance we won't be seeing them again for a long time. Maybe if they get married, or maybe if they have a baby and they want to get baptism. But the kids we almost have written off. But I want to ask the question is, what happens to the parents once the last kid is confirmed? Look around you today. When you don't give them an opportunity to see it in us, they will choose nothing. That isn't to say, and these articles were clear, that isn't to say that people aren't spiritual. It's very clear that the nuns also say that they are spiritual people. It's just they are not seeing God in the same way that you and I see God. They don't experience God in the same way you and I think God should be experienced. They were just as easily would see God out in nature as they would see God in themselves. They would just as easily see God being any form of a higher power, being equal with any other form. Whereas we want to say that God is God. He's a jealous God. You'll have no other gods before us. Many of the nuns say that they are spiritual. They're just not religious, meaning they're not connected. They're not going to be pigeonholed into one area or one denomination. Well, that's pretty bleak. You want to know where they are? The fact of the matter is they're not here. But I do believe there is hope. I do believe there's hope. And the reality is, we now have a vast mission field. We may have created it, but there is a vast mission field out there, just waiting for those who are genuine to talk to them. There is this huge field. I'd like to read out of Matthew chapter 9. Jesus is saying this to his disciples, but he says, "Then Jesus went about all the cities and the villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and curing every disease and every sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, 'The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest.'" That's a wonderful passage. Because what Jesus is saying to them is that his situation isn't that much different than what ours is. There's a vast group of people around Jesus who still do not know. And Jesus sends his disciples into that field, into that environment. And he says to them, go there, into that place, into the lives of the people who do not know yet, or who are upset, or who are struggling, or whatever it is. Go there and witness. There is a vast mission field out there. I would like to challenge the church of God universally, our church here specifically, to stop being timid about our faith. If we want the church full, we need to stop being timid about our faith. We need to start welcoming people to that which is so important to us. We need to show people. We need to let them hear it from us. We need to display it in what we're doing out into the world beyond this building so that they see in us, not just our words, but they see in us the faith that is so important. I believe that we have a whole generation or two of people surrounding this church that are just waiting to hear your story. A story like what Maddie said, and what Jerry shared last month. It takes people who are not going to be quiet about their faith to have the opportunity come to speak. Now, Elim is not that different from any other congregation, especially Lutheran congregation. Traditional kind of Protestant churches are not really, really good at inviting. The last council meeting, I asked the church council members, I challenged them. I said to them, I would like them over the next month, that means from the last council meeting to the next council meeting, to invite one person to a church event. Doesn't have to be worship, anything. To the dinner that we're holding downstairs today, or the shrimp dinner we're going to be holding later on in the week. Invite someone who doesn't come anymore. Maybe someone who was in the past connected to the church, but has for some reason or another dropped off, or someone who is not going to a church anymore, and invite them to come with you to some event here at Elim. And I was going to go back next council meeting and I'm going to ask them if they did that. And what was the result? What was the result of them simply inviting someone to come with them to something here? There are still times I feel that the church is very exclusionary. We are much better at keeping our walls in around us than we are of breaking those walls down and inviting the community. How many times, even when we invite, do we invite people to join us? Have you ever used those words? Come and join us? Come on, it's a response here. Yes. Thank you. Otherwise, I'm thinking I'm off base here, and I don't know if that's the case or not. Do you realize what we're trying to do is we're trying to be welcoming and invite people to come, right? What we're really saying to them, though, is we are the thus and you're not. Come and join us means that you're not a part of us. We would like you to become a part of us maybe, but you're not us. You are them. Okay? So language matters. I didn't ask the council to invite someone to come and be with us. I asked them to go and invite someone to come with them. Come with me. Big difference. One is welcoming, the other's exclusionary. We still expect people to do things the way that we have always done them. I go back, and I don't mean to step on toes, but this goes back quite a few years. I still enjoy the arguments, the discussions I had with some of the women, the old-time women here at the church, not those present here, over silverware in the drawer. Some of you laugh because you remember that. There were bins in the drawers downstairs in the kitchen, and we've got like 3 or 4 different sets of silverware down there, and not only were the forks, spoons, and knives supposed to be put in their own bin, but each type of silverware was supposed to be put in its own bin, and oh my gosh, if you got them mixed up. Now, it was important back then, I get that I used to go and mix them up, I will confess to you. I'm sorry, Maureen, I did. She's looking at me like, oh, that was where it happened. I did sometimes, because it was important for me to make a point that it's not as important about what silverware is in what bin. It's important that we want to have everybody be a part. Because if we compartmentalize everything, what do you do with someone who doesn't dress like us? Who may wear shorts to church? Who may go and have long hair? Or who knows? If we start saying you've got to fit into our little cubbies all the time and be just like us, there's always going to be people who are not like us. And we're not going to be able to witness to them. How many times do we still expect people to introduce themselves to us? That still happens. There are people that come to the church that we don't know. And we'll go downstairs and sit around the coffee tables and have coffee and all that, and we'll expect those people to come and sit down at our table and introduce themselves to who we are. I would bet probably most, if not all of them, will never do that. Because it is extremely difficult, except if you are a politician or if you are extremely extroverted. It's very, very difficult for someone to come into a position in a place where they know nobody and stand up and say, "Hi, I'm a guest here. My name is Jim." It doesn't happen. And it won't happen. We have to welcome. We have to ask. It's why this church has been putting so much effort into trying to break some of these habits. It's why my passion has been for so long to reach out to young people. It's because if we don't, you might as well have the last person who leaves the church turn the lights off. Because it won't take very long, and the church won't be here anymore. Not because they're the future, but because they're the mission field. They're out around us all the time. And all it takes is for us to invite. I also have been trying very hard to let parents know the importance it is to be that example. That's why I talk to parents at baptisms and have the whole families and all those people standing around and say to them, you have to be the example. Because if you're not, your child has a much more difficult time knowing what faith is. That's why we hand Bibles out to all of our kids. Not just the older ones, but all of our kids. So that hopefully they'll get into this idea that you bring them home and parents in the beginning can open them and page through them and read them. And as the kids grow up, they'll see their parents reading and they will read as well. It's time to turn the trends around. I think this is a mission opportunity. I think there's an opportunity out there. We do not have to go down the same road into oblivion. There is a mission field out there. Pray to the Lord that He sends out ministers into that mission field. That's an important lesson. So why are so many people falling away from their faith? Maybe a more important question would be, is how can we reach out to them and bring them back? Okay. Thank you for that question. That was a very, very good question.